Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Wednesday, February 12th. Derek Van Riper, Eno Saris here with you on this episode. We continue with our 2025 team preview series. We move into the AL West. The series just started up on the episode before this one. We got the NL West already in the bank. We're lining up for 2 divisions per week. So we got 2 more weeks of previews wrapped around all the other great shows we're doing. Good news, as we mentioned earlier in the week, Eno's starting pitcher rankings have dropped on The Athletic. If you don't have a subscription, theathletic.com/ratesandbarrels will get you one. From there, check out the ranks. We're going to discuss those on Friday because we're going to focus a lot on the pitchers that Eno loves in 2025.
Yay! There's already mistakes. I'm sorry. I'll clean them up. I didn't share the Google Docs. I woke up to a ton of Google Doc requests. Somebody in Discord spotted that even before I was awake. And then Drew Rasmussen's not in there. If you're listening, he's probably around 50, I think around Clay Holmes. Somebody with a grid projection, not many innings, maybe some role question. Yes, Max Scherzer is a Blue Jay.
How the sausage is made with rankings deserves its own episode at some point in the future, but we will save that for now. You mentioned the Discord.
It's really hard actually just to get all the pitchers because you'll do a projection system, right? And then and that'll have some holes in it. You'll do who played last year, and that'll have some holes in it. Then you could do like depth charts. Like I comb through it like 4 times just to make sure I have all the pitchers. And somehow Drew Rasmussen, maybe he's on a depth chart somewhere as a reliever. Didn't play that much last year. I don't know what it is, but he didn't show up in my. So there you go.
It happens. But you mentioned the Discord. You can join the Discord with the link in the show description. A lot of conversation there. We have specific team channels. We got strategy channels for fantasy. All sorts of good stuff in there. We'll try to share some more of the graphics from the show there. So if you're not watching us on YouTube, you can still see some of the visuals that we're putting up because they may be insightful for you. Even if you're just listening, you check them out later. Discord link in the show description. All right, we're going to continue our preview series in the AL West and start with the Astros. And we kind of have a question wrapped around the analysis. Are they still the favorites to win this division? We've been looking at the PECTOA projections. By projection, they're not, but they won the division last year, so they get the top spot in our preview. You look at what they've done this offseason. Trading Kyle Tucker to the Cubs is a big loss, although he missed about half of last season with a leg injury, so they've already weathered that storm to some degree. They bring in Christian Walker. They get Isaac Paredes back in the Kyle Tucker trade. And then there's this question. For now, Alex Bregman is out, but perhaps by the time this episode is finished or in the next few days, there will be a reunion with Alex Bregman. That is at least still on the table. We've been known to speak transactions into existence by recording content and having it be immediately stale once it drops. So perhaps we'll get lucky once again with Alex Bregman. I think the big question around the core group of hitters for Houston is Yordan Alvarez completely healthy? It's something we worry about all the time. Like the amount of time and energy I expend worrying about Yordan Alvarez's knees is staggering. He says he's going to be ready for spring training, won't have any limitations playing left field. They probably have some designs on DHing him more anyway. So is this team, despite trading Kyle Tucker away, at least on a similar level to where they were a year ago?
I don't think so. To answer your titular question, I think this is the year for change. What is it now? It's been 7 years out of the last 8. The Houston Astros have taken this division, and I'm calling for change. And one of the things you mentioned was, they weathered the storm with Kyle Tucker last year. With Kyle Tucker mostly being out. I'd like to point you to the playoff odds for the division. You can actually go to Fangraphs and see last year's playoff odds in a graph format. And if you look at the Astros last year, they were not the favorite to win the division as late as August 15th. And guess what happened in August?
Kyle Tucker got healthy.
Yes. Kyle Tucker came back. By projections, you mentioned that they, over at Fangraphs, they're in a virtual tie with the Mariners. and the Rangers are a game ahead of those. So it's a total scrum. And then by vibe, my vibe check here, I'm the senior vibe reporter. My vibe check here is that this is the denouement of a dynasty because the stars are leaving and the youth isn't producing the same kind of level of stars as were there before. The player development system isn't quite, the wheels aren't quite as greased as they were before, and so you're basing your hopes this year on shakier foundation. Yordan Alvarez's knees, Isaac Perez's ability to be anything close to Alex Bregman, Jose Altuve's aging bat, one of the worst collection of outfielders in the big leagues. And I don't want to be too negative. There are ways this can work out. Hayden Wesneski is kind of a fun pitcher here. Let's do that. Hayden Wesneski's got kind of a fun pitcher. He comes out of the Michael King, Clark Schmidt, Will Warren mold. I just wanted to show that graphically, which is to say, guys that don't necessarily have great four-seamers, have great sweepers, and have a certain arm slot where they have to figure out what to do against lefties. Michael King's changeup stuff plus grade may surprise people. It was a 78. I've definitely talked to people about this, even to people on the Padres. And I think what it is if you look at a heat map for how Michael King places that changeup, he puts it on a dime. I mean, he's got great command of that thing. So I think more of that value comes from command than actual stuff because it looks like a changeup you would get from that kind of arm slot. But generally, he has great command, a great sweeper, and he's made it all work by, if you can see, the Michael King's four-seam stuff plus is 100, his sinker is 98. So he's gotten just enough out of his fastballs. Clark Schmidt, the breakout was going to that cutter. He has a 104 stuff plus cutter, 87 sinker, and a better curve than King. So they're not exactly the same pitchers. It's just a similar arm slot, similar stuff. Wesneski has 85 on the stuff plus on the four seam, 102 on the sinker, 82 on the cutter, and 92 on the change. So he's stuck kind of in between. He's not Schmidt and he's not King. He has a lot of similarities, but he doesn't have the fastball of King. He doesn't have the curveball of Schmidt. I put Luis Ortiz on there and Will Warren on there just as reference points. But Wesneski does have the pieces to be a Luis Ortiz, to be Clark Schmidt, if not a Michael King. And he's their 5. So if they pull that together, it's a decent rotation. I mean, I really like Arrighetti as a sleeper this year. And he might actually be my pick for starting pitcher sleeper. And Fromber is just a steady Eddie every year. Hunter Brown seems ascendant to ace quality. And even if Blanco regresses, you got Luis Garcia coming back at some point. It's a pretty good rotation. So I'm not going to talk smack on this rotation.
Yeah, I think that's sort of where they can make up ground. If the pitching exceeds expectations, they did it last year with a few guys. I mean, the steps that Hunter Brown took were massive. We've talked a lot about those on the show. Renel Blanco's season was incredible. Yeah. Spencer Arrighetti has shown some promise. They will get Luis Garcia back from Tommy John surgery eventually. You have the possibility of Wesneski clicking. So they have a nice rotation and a little bit of depth there too. I think it's also a question of whether or not they, will miss Ryan Presley just from a depth perspective. Probably not that much. I mean, yeah, he's a nice reliever, had a nice run in Houston, but I think with Hader and Abreu still there as your top 2 high leverage guys and a decent cast behind them still to gobble up the middle innings, they're probably in good enough shape. It's just kind of
weird.
I'd
like to see what Forrest Whitley might do.
Yeah, he's out of options
back as a reliever. He's out of options. I think he's going to make that bullpen. He has high-end stuff. They do need someone, I think, behind Abreu. Right now, Taylor Scott and Brian King are sitting there at 92 miles an hour as the next option. So it's not all about velocity, but when you're a reliever, it kind of is. The lineup is for all the things I said that were negative about it, it's still pretty good in that if you count the number of holes in this lineup, and they're all in the outfield.
But of all the things you could need in season, if you need to go out and get a corner outfielder or two in the trade market,
and think of like where pop-ups come from, like where that guy. A lot of times it's just opportunity outfield, like Jurickson Profar. If they have. They could have a Jurickson Profar on this team. Maybe Jake Myers takes a slight step forward with the power after a couple of years removed now from the shoulder injury. Maybe Chas McCormick finds it again. I like Jacob Melton a little bit. Do you like Jacob Melton? One thing I like about Melton is he's a left-hander that can play center. So if the Jake Myers experiment doesn't work out, Jacob Melton, not projected to be great because he wasn't amazing in AAA. And he's 24, but a left-hander with glove and legs, could step into that void if Jake Myers doesn't keep it going. So they have some options. What did they sign a super? Oh, Ben Gamel, yes,
right, Ben Gamel.
Yeah, well, I do think it's maybe the worst outfield. If you take Yordan Alvarez out of it, it's the worst. It might be the worst outfield in baseball.
Yeah, I do think the overall concern around Alvarez is warranted because when you look at the projections, he's projected for a 171 WRC plus. The rest of this core, Walker, a nice addition, a 115. Altuve, because of aging, down to a 109. Paredes, a 107. Projections are always a little soft on him. I think he fits the park really well. They don't have that secondary big bat behind Alvarez anymore.
It's a little bit more like no holes than like standout lineup. It's more like a decent lineup.
It's no holes, and then usually there was no holes except for Martin Maldonado. Now it's kind of like the bottom third of the order instead of the 9 spot is starting to become a concern. Maybe we all like Chas McCormick going to last season. Maybe we were a year too early there. Maybe you're right about someone like Myers. Maybe Yainer Diaz behind the plate takes another step forward and he ends up being 20 or 25% better than league average.
But he makes it a little bit doable to have basically an outfield full of holes because you usually have a hole at short and catcher and center, right? If you have that's like teams will have 2 or 3 holes in those places because they're like, hey, we'll just put defense there. And having Pena and Diaz does afford them, a little bit more wiggle room in the outfield. Mm-hmm. But that's where they need someone to step forward.
Yeah. So I do think that's the weakness as it stands right now, but a reunion with Bregman, probably because of how tightly clustered the first 3 teams in this division are, a reunion with Bregman might be enough to give them a little bit of separation in the initial projections. As we do on all of our team previews, we got the PECTOA win total numbers from Baseball Prospectus. 87.5 is the win total number from PECTOA as of Wednesday morning. Too hot, too cold, or just right on these Astros.
Too hot for me. 84 at Fangraphs. That's not my entire reasoning. I gave my entire reasoning.
That was what the last 12 minutes were for.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I think it's just right on the strength of that pitching. I think the bottom 2 teams in this division still lag enough too, or if you can,
it might just give them wins.
Might be able to beat up on those teams just enough to hang around, even if you have a few flaws to address. And I don't get the sense that the Jim Crane Astros are a team that will remain in contention at the trade deadline and do nothing. I kind of give them the benefit of the doubt that they'll keep pushing chips in, even if they're sitting around a payroll level on opening day that they want to hold firm at for now, because they're generally pretty active mid-season. And I do think they're going to miss Kikuchi, even though they've got that depth, because I think the back end fill-ins are not as good as what Kikuchi was at the end of last season. So another little thing that's different about the Astros today versus what we saw at the end of last season. Let's shift the focus over to the Rangers. Are the Rangers ready for another playoff run? That is the big question here. They also are a team that hasn't had a ton of money to spend, but they've been active this winter yet again. And if you look at who's in versus who's out, it is a combination of Jock Peterson, Jake Berger, and Kyle Higashioka in, with Nathaniel Lowe and Carson Kelly going out on the hitter side. They did keep Nate Eovaldi, and they've pretty much rebuilt their entire bullpen. Robert Garcia, who came back in the Nate Lowe trade, Chris Martin, who they signed, Jacob Webb, Sean Armstrong, Hobie Milner, Jesse Chavez. Max Scherzer's gone. Kirby Yates is gone. If you didn't have Kirby Yates on a fantasy team or you weren't watching the Rangers much last year, you might not realize how good he was. That's a pretty big loss, but they've taken the volume approach to the bullpen. Jose Leclerc is gone as well. I'm really curious what you think about the Rangers offseason overall, and then how much you trust a boost from the youth, right? A full healthy season of Wyatt Langford. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see he's got the third highest plate appearance projection of this group. That could go a long way. And then, of course, Josh Young, who's battled a lot of injuries, the possibility of having him healthy, and maybe even more Evan Carter this year, could give them 3 pretty significant upgrades across this position player group.
Dude, are they the most yo-yo-y team in baseball?
I think because of the health, right? We started talking about it even when they signed DeGrom and even Seager. Like, for big money free agents they brought in recent years, they took on some risk, like some significant risk.
I guess you could say that on the hitting side too, because they gave a lot of money to Simeon and Seager, who are, by older and by definition going to have down seasons and hurt seasons. That's interesting. I hadn't thought about it in that way, but they were bad last year. Do you know how bad they were last year? I'm not even looking at wins. I'm just saying they had the 24th best pitching staff by WAR. And by batting, they were the no, that's not even right there. They were 22nd by batting. And by fielding, they were, where are they? 8th. They were okay in fielding. Why do they do this? Maybe it is the free agency thing. Maybe it is the injury thing. But when I look at this team for going forward for this year, I think that they might be the biggest threat to the Astros dynasty here. When I look at this team, I see a team that has coverage in case people are hurt. Like, I think Ezekiel Duran and Josh Smith are one of the best depth duos in the game, and they can play anywhere on the field and be acceptable. And I know that doesn't sound super exciting, but that's super exciting. They're a lefty-righty duo that can kind of step in and platoon for people if that's what's needed, or if someone's hurt for a while, they can play anywhere. And that is such good spackle for the roster. And on the starting pitcher side, I think at this point, you've pushed, guys like John Gray and Tyler Mahle into and Cody Bradford into spackle positions, right? You're hoping that the health of DeGrom and Rocker at the top is what makes you go. But if there is a moment where they need a blow, you actually have over time developed decent starting pitcher depth. So this is the kind of team that looks like it spent last year hurting, and it also spent last year thinking about what to do, to cover for when those things are hurting and to get ready for DeGrom's return, basically.
Yeah, and they've got another pitching prospect who might not be that far away in Alejandro Rosario. I'm curious to see how fast they actually want to move him. He got to high A in 2024, but he's a college guy they got in the 2023 draft. He's moving up a lot of prospect lists, so maybe we see him by the end of the year as well, and you get a lot more ceiling at the top of this group. You take some of the veterans, push them into bulk roles over the course of the year, maybe turn them into long relievers eventually. But I agree with you as far as the yo-yo and the range of outcomes. And I think the move they made that at first I kind of shrugged off and was like, yeah, okay. I mean, it makes them maybe a little better or gives them cover against the possibility of Josh Young having more health issues, was the addition of Jake Burger. And I took a look at Jake Burger's hard hit rate for his entire career, just the rolling 15 game average. We talk about these all the time on the show. A really helpful thing you can look at over Fangraphs. You'll see a dip in the first part of 2024. And Jake Burger had an intercostal strain. And you'll see once he got healthy, the hard hit rate came back, right? And I think what we're looking at is an underrated power hitter. I think we're looking at a guy that's more of a 35 to 40 homer threat on an annual basis. And even though the plate skills are not what you necessarily would draw up if you were trying to make the perfect power hitter, I think he's going to do enough damage, at least for these next couple of seasons, where the Rangers are going to look really sharp for making this trade. Like, they might be the kind of team that will never extend Jake Burger. They would never sign a player like this in free agency. But when you can go year to year for a guy going through arbitration, I think you take the power on the cheap, and I think they're going to be handsomely rewarded for it.
Yeah, he's an underrated athlete too. He's 66th percentile for running speed. He's faster than Willie Adames.
That is surprising.
Yeah. And, so I think, and what's also interesting is he's maintained that running speed, even with the intercostal strain. He's maintained that. So he hasn't hit some sort of beer league slugger decline, even though, honestly, sometimes looks a little bit like that.
Sure.
Like
4 or 5 years from now. Yeah.
Shame. Yeah. But he does not look as athletic as he is. And I think he does add a power dimension that they were lacking a little bit down lineup. I don't know that he's going to be one of the top 4 hitters on this squad, but having him as a number 5 is pretty fun because the 5 spot in the lineup, to have a guy who can just hit a homer at any moment, that's almost ideal, To alternate down lineup, you kind of want to alternate power guys and contact guys, just ways to drive the top of the lineup in. I think Wyatt Langford took a real step forward last year. We already highlighted a great piece by Michael Rosen on Fangraphs about how Wyatt Langford stood more upright in the second half, became less scoopy, and was able to cover all parts of the zone with power, and was, I think, one of the top 3 position players by WAR in the second half last year. And I think that speaks well to his game, which is he is really sort of polished. He's really good at everything. And you may reach for more exciting players that have top end tools. I think of, maybe comparing him to a Churio or a Merrill or something I think they're all almost of equal quality, but Langford may have the highest floor of them all because I think he's always going to battle in plate appearances, always going to have a high walk rate, always going to have a low strikeout rate, always going to have enough power, enough speed, enough defense. He may outwar them, just with his different combination. It may be harder because he's not a center fielder, and maybe Merrill just takes that based on that. But Langford is, I think, of that quality, and to have a guy like that join with your aging hitters that are still good, I think adds a dimension that's great. And Evan Carter, I do think he has some flaws. I'm not sure he hits the ball as hard as Langford, but he can get on base. He may be a platoon guy, but you still have Leody Taveras. So this is a pretty good lineup that has alternating power and contact and patience, a lot of different aspects to it. It's a diverse lineup in terms of approaches and handedness. And like I said before, has pretty good backups in Smith and Duran.
Yeah. The other question I have for you thinking about this lineup is Jock Peterson. He doesn't really play the field anymore at all, but he's a mashing DH on the big side of a platoon, projected to be 26% better than league average by WRC Plus from the Bat X. Is a player like Peterson, and I think the Tigers, you could say something similar about Kerry Carpenter, although Carpenter can play a bit more in the outfield at this stage of his career. Is this a great use of a roster spot relative to cost where WAR won't capture the impact of having a player that's that dangerous at the plate on your roster in the starting lineup 75% of the time, and then available off the bench when you face a left-handed starter at the most critical juncture in the middle or late innings? I'm starting to think this is one little weak spot with WAR and how we think about players and how they're valued.
I think generally one of the things about WAR is that it assumes a singular replacement level, and of course it does because it's a construct. It's a way of thinking about baseball. It's not necessarily particular to your situation. So if you think you can turn out Durans and Smiths, right? And so you think your replacement level is above 0. You think at the very worst, I've got a Smith and Duran type at the ready who's kind of like a 1-win, 1.5-win player. That changes your concept of a replacement level. It also changes your concept of how important is Peterson's fielding to me if I have these other 2 pieces that I can move around to play any position, right?
Exactly.
And so, there are ways that players are fits. And then lastly, one thing that WAR doesn't necessarily account for, which I believe is true, is that DHing is a skill. And if DHing is a skill, what that means is there's a pinch hitter penalty, a DH penalty. By being on the bench, you're supposed to be 10% worse than if you'd been playing in the field. I don't think that's true for everybody, And I think that certain players figure out how to stay engaged in the game, or sometimes it just seems like Jock can. It doesn't matter. Maybe he's playing the David Ortiz game and he's super cerebral, but like I don't know. My vibe from him is that he doesn't care. He just gets in there and he's just trying to yank that ball down the line for a homer. And he doesn't care who's pitching, doesn't care what's going on. Maybe my vibe is wrong. He doesn't really connect with media, so it's hard to tell. But that's my vibe on him, is that he kind of the idea of like rolling out of bed.
Okay.
And like hitting homers. That's my vibe on him. He doesn't look good body wise. Anyway, so if he has that skill, if he has that DHing skill, then we're probably penalizing too much defensively in WAR, and we're not giving him enough credit for having this skill that is hard to capture. So I think there's a couple ways that you can make the case that you're making.
We talked about the pitching a little bit with Eovaldi back. I think that's an important kind of glue guy, middle of the rotation, maybe technically on paper a number 2 starter, at least to start the year, behind DeGrom. Tyler Mahle, further removed from Tommy John, maybe gets a little more stuff back, but the early results by stuff were not great. So there's some questions.
And those are meaningful
there.
You know, there's a piece by Jeff Zimmerman that your third start back from the IL. I mean, and so he has a season off, so that's why it's a little bit confounding. But if Tyler Mahle had those 3 starts in April coming back from injury, then that would have predicted his fastball velocity for the rest of the season with like an 80-90% accuracy. So yes, he has the off season and he could maybe recapture it. Maybe he's hard at work. Maybe he's going to come back with more velo. So there's a little bit more of a question there, but he did not come back with this stuff. And so he is low on my rankings. And conversely, I have Jack Leiter for more innings than Tyler Mahle because I like Jack Leiter. And I think that he doesn't have good command, but he has top shelf stuff. And I think at some point they're just going to turn to the guy with top shelf stuff.
And of course, we saw a great season in the minors from Kumar Rocker, debuted at the end of the year, and he's going to be important, I think, to their success this year as well. I think there's a good chance he ends up being their second or third best starter behind DeGrom, assuming DeGrom stays healthy.
Projecting innings for him is difficult. I had a
very
hard time
difficult.
He has very few innings in his pocket, but you don't know. Maybe the Rangers are like, "Hey, this is our year." You know, I don't know how maybe they play some games where he's not in the opening day rotation because they're trying to push some of those innings to October, but. I don't know how many innings he's going to have this year. I think 137 sounds very optimistic. That's what we're looking at right now.
Both Mahle and John Gray are projected for 148. It's tied for third behind Eovaldi and DeGrom. And there's been some rumblings lately that John Gray might be considered for the bullpen as a possible closer, which would be exciting. I mentioned the rebuilt bullpen before. We've sort of landed on Robert Garcia as the reliever we like the most of the bunch, but they got Chris Martin. They got Josh Spores eventually back in the mix there. It's more of a longer term play. I think Spores is coming back from another injury, but how would Gray kind of fit into this picture? We talk all the time about teams taking relievers and making them starters, how that impacts your stuff number because it brings down your fastball velocity in particular. But what about going the other way? Would John Gray actually be a really good high leverage reliever if the Rangers felt they had enough depth with guys like Cody Bradford and Dane Dunning possibly being the glue guys in the rotation?
As a sort of rule across the board, we came up with sort of 5 to 7 points as of Stuff Plus as the adjustment. Right now, John Gray has a 91 Stuff Plus, so he would still sort of just enter the mix and not necessarily dominate it. But that's a general rule. And we've seen people, you know, the general rule for adding velocity is like a couple ticks, right? We know that there are some that are just way beyond that. There's some guys who've gone to the pen and they throw so much harder than they threw, you know, as starters. And so if John Gray goes to the pen and sits, you know, 98, he's been sitting 95, 96 the last 3 years. If he sits 98, then a lot of the shape problems on his fastball start to become less important. And all those other things he's been doing to try and, you know, make things work, like throwing the curveball and the change, he doesn't have to do that anymore. And he becomes that fastball slider guy that he is at his heart. And he could really take to it. So if I was them, another way to see about it is like, remember those first 2 outings in spring where they just go for an inning or two? If John Gray is like pumping 98s, pumping hundos, like I might pull him aside and be like, if you're into this, let's do it.
And it sounds like he is on board with that sort of usage. It could be kind of a big second act for his career. It might be the kind of thing that gives him 3 or 4 years as a 8-figure reliever. That could easily happen with the core
at some
skill.
point, it actually becomes a good financial decision.
Yeah.
There's, you think about if you're good enough, you get those 1 in 10, 1 in 15s that like Max Scherzer just got. And like, if you're good enough, but I think if John Gray was a free agent right now, he wouldn't get the 1 in 15.
Probably not. He'd probably get just a bit less than that because of all the injuries he has dealt with.
If he came out as a closer, you could get 3 in 30.
Yeah. If he showed he was that effective with the extra velo, I'm with you on a projection like that for him. As far as the win projection goes from PECTOA, 89.9 is the total as we sit here on Wednesday morning. Too hot, too cold, or just right for the Rangers?
I mean, this is the weird thing about thinking in terms of what's it called? Probabilistic thinking. Like this, I would say it's just right. However, I would also say it is completely wrong. It's not going to be that. It's going to be 82 or it's going to be 93. Like I think this is a real boom or bust team. I think there's a lot of stuff that could really come together and that you could be like, they could win it all this year. Don't you think? Like they could win it all this year. DeGrom and Rocker and Eovaldi is like the 3 and Jack Leiter is like a super sub in October. And like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. This could definitely win it all. Or that bullpen is terrible. Simeon finally gets hurt for the first time. Seager's hurt again. Langford has a sort of sophomore slump, whatever it is. There's a lot of ways that can go the other way.
Yeah, I had this down as a just right. I agree with the lean because of the injury risk, especially. It seems like it's elevated for some pretty important guys. They could be a lot better than this. They could be surprisingly worse, but I do feel like the number is just right. Spoiler alert, I kind of felt like PECTOA nailed the AL West overall when I was looking at the numbers, getting ready for this
So they
episode.
have the Rangers winning it.
They do. They actually have the Rangers winning the division. But it's clearly a 3-team cluster based on their numbers.
Pretty tight because over at Fangraphs, it's 1 win. It's like 84, 84, and 85. So
yeah, 89-9, 87-5, 86-4. And the 86-4 belongs to the Seattle Mariners. And the big question in Seattle is, can they hit enough to support the elite arms they have? I mean, the rotation's phenomenal. I think there are some questions maybe about the bullpen depth, but I think this is one of the things that Jerry DiPoto's done very well over the course of his time there. That front office has generally found relievers pretty effectively. The ballpark helps a little bit, but I don't think it's only the ballpark. Their offseason has been strange, man. In Donovan Solano back on a new deal, Jorge Polanco out, Josh Rojas. I mean, like that's quiet. And it's kind of like the AJ Preller thing where you're like, wow, that's too quiet for this Mariners team.
I think they are also limited financially with a hard budget cap in a similar possible way.
Yeah, and one thing I talked about at PitchCon on the off-season grades panel with Justin Mason and Brent Hershey
not
was
sort
that
this by stolen bases. I don't want to see Victor Robles at the top the whole time.
Yeah, I trolled myself. I didn't even do that on purpose. Yeah. Why did I do that? There we go.
Thank you.
Everything's back in its right place. We're sort of by plate appearances again. But I did say that when we're grading an off-season, you can end up with a lower grade if you made a move that helps you beyond the current season at the trade deadline. And the Mariners, in defense of them, did do that with Randy Arozarena, right? It wasn't a rental, and you could still be mad as a Mariners fan. But you should acknowledge that they did trade for a guy that I think does make their lineup better. I think by projections is probably their 3rd or 4th best hitter by WRC+, and one of the guys ahead of him doesn't play every day.
Really surprised. If you give Victor Robles, he's a 99 WRC production, let's just give him 100. Mm-hmm. If you do that, I think people would be very surprised to hear that they have 8 hitters that project to be average or better.
Yeah. I mean, I'm surprised, and I've been staring at this for more than a day. Like, I'm looking at it like, is this right? Is this math right? Is the bad X okay? Is the bad X under the weather? Like, what's the cause here? Obviously, you've got Julio Rodriguez at the top. Like, that's a superstar. That's great. You have that. Cal Raleigh mashes behind the plate. That helps. We talked about that when we were describing how bad the infield was just a few weeks ago. It's like, well, your catcher's really good, so that helps offset.
Center fielder's really good. You know, like they are good in some key spots.
Yeah, J.P. Crawford's a little underrated. It's not the 25 homer, 10 steal shortstop that you want, but he plays. He's fine. He gets on base, and plays a decent shortstop, but there's nothing wrong with him.
Okay, decent defense this year. He's had very sort of up and down defense.
Yeah, so you start to look and say, okay, this actually holds up fine. It's not. Is this lineup? Is this collection of position players, given the holes we described in the Astros outfield, is this lineup that much different than Houston's in terms of overall quality? Maybe it's got some more noise in it because of the health concerns of a guy like Polanco, who's projected to be league average. Even Victor Robles, his own health concerns, I think, are significant. Arozarena being kind of a volatile player last year, especially. Like there are more questions maybe because of who the players are. But when you look at the raw numbers, it doesn't look that different, except for the fact that Yordan Alvarez has a better offensive projected ceiling than Julio.
Yeah, I'm not as hyperbolic about it. I don't think this is necessarily the worst infield in baseball, but it has that sort of mirror-like quality to the Astros, where it's like, okay, you have the bad outfield, we have the bad infield. I think in particular, this infield is the weakest at second and third. And that was something I highlighted in my pieces over the week, over the off season. Getting Polanco back is good. I did want to say real quick, one thing that we talked a lot about the park factors there, and there's been some good work by Leaky Barn on Twitter and Bluesky. And one thing that he pointed out, there's two things that are interesting to Jorge Polanco. One is that it's a function of light. It has something to do with the setting sun. And so he found that there is a park factor that if you account for stuff and everything, like the quality of the batter, the ground of the pitch, you can find a park factor that has a time factor to it. So there's a certain time of the day where it's worse. And this is what's interesting to Jorge Polanco. He found that people who come back to it, second, third year players, people who have played there for a while, do better in that situation than people who were there for the first time. And you saw Jorge Polanco, yes, there was a bit of injury associated with it, but you saw him got better over the course of the season, even at home. And so you have a little bit more hope bringing Polanco back than you would bringing someone of sort of equal kind of league average-ish talent in, because they may just be like, oh, crap, what is this sunlight batter's eye combination thing that's going on? So, as bad as it may look with Jorge Polanco, he was good in the second half last year, and he may be more equipped to handle the particulars there. Luke Raley was pretty good last year, just as is, and if he's more comfortable with it this year, that's great. He's an athlete. He is a runner with an arm and he can hit the ball hard. He just can't hit lefties, but he's like their Jock Peterson in a way, and except he can play at first at least. So I like some of the pieces. We talked about Ryan Bliss. Cole Young is probably a little bit more interesting to me, but also has that ability to play short, so he may be their shortstop of the future. But between Young and Bliss and Locklear, they do have some young guys coming up that could patch holes. Let me ask you this, just in terms of this year's talent, would you rather have Young, Locklear, and Bliss, or Josh Smith and Ezekiel Duran?
Probably Smith and Duran. I mean, Smith was really good in the first half last year, and the defensive versatility is huge. But yeah, the long-term implications, I think Cole Young's going to be a nice player. I think he's probably the guy that has the most ceiling out of the group, where maybe by the second half, he's got a regular role. It's interesting you mentioned the second year thing. I do think the park is even worse for righties than lefties, just based on the guys that have struggled there historically. Mitch Haniger was brutal last year, or not Mitch Haniger. Mitch Garver was kind of brutal last year.
Garver has had a really oscillating career. So
yeah, he's been up and down anyway.
He could actually get it figured out this year if he can see the ball better, get back to more of a 26, 28% strikeout level, and gets the power back in there. I mean, he was a 140 WRC hitter in 2023.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth the gamble where he's going in deep enough leagues. I don't know if you're talking about a 10-team fantasy league sort of player, but Garver could actually bounce back, and it wouldn't be that much of a surprise given the overall body of work for his career. The strength of this team, though, continues to be its pitching, right? You had Logan Gilbert, Luis Castillo didn't get traded, George Kirby, really the 1-2 with Gilbert, Bryce Miller, Brian Wu. I mean, it's a phenomenal group, and they have a little bit of depth, too, if they were to lose a starter. But as far as rotations go, it's hard to ask for a whole lot more.
Yeah, I think that the only thing is that there is a I don't like their depth.
You don't like the depth at all.
Don't really like Emerson Hancock, and I can't even Trent Thornton. Who's what's their depth?
Yeah, Hancock's the first name that comes to mind.
Yeah.
So maybe that's Logan Evans, kind of interesting.
Oh, Logan Evans, actually, yeah, and he could develop. He's close, so yeah, okay, that's okay. The other thing is, Logan Gilbert throws really close to his max. Bryce Miller is a reliever that throws really close to his max. Brian Wu has had a lot of injury. He's just. None of it's been the big one. It's always been like, the hamstring or the back. It's, so these little things that have kept him from adding. And maybe they've been so good with the preventative maintenance that he's just going to be fine. But he also strikes me as a little bit slight in terms of, just his body. So I do think if you tell the story of the Mariners falling apart this year, it has to do with injury in the rotation.
Yeah, multiple pitching injuries becoming a big part of the problem. But I think Evans and Hancock as like a 6-7. That's good enough when you're 1 through 5. Is it good? If you lose 2 or 3 of those guys to major injuries, which would be true of any team, right? It would be devastating for them. But so much of their team is built on pitching and run prevention. We'll have to see how they put the pieces together. Now, you talked about Andres Munoz, someone you really like this year. They do use him a little more flexibly than a traditional closer. That's still part of the equation. But how do you feel about their bullpen? Do you think it has taken a small step back, or do you think it is one of the top 10 bullpens in baseball right now?
I think it's really weird that it doesn't register as a top 10 bullpen right now. It's like middle of the pack and 15th or so. When I look at the collection of pitchers that they have in their bullpen, I think could be an awesome bullpen. I mean, I really like Gregory Santos. Matt Brash is going to come back at some point. Trent Thornton has been fine as a reliever, and Munoz is amazing. So, you're already kind of 3 or 4 deep with really good pitchers, and they have a real good sense of like how to optimize pitchers based on their stuff plus and based on their characteristics. So I don't know, who else will step forward. Maybe Evans, this is where Evans makes his biggest impact. I mean, there's some who think that he's headed towards being a reliever anyway, but I generally have a lot of faith in Mariners pitching coaching and pitching development and their ability to put together a really good bullpen. So I think they'll be better than 15th for sure.
All right. Before we get to the win total projection, I had a fun fact prepared for the Mariners. Victor Robles has 56 barrels in 2,096 career plate appearances in the big leagues. 17 players in the big leagues had more than 56 barrels last season alone. So I just want to put that out there. Just remember
this content for the day.
You're drafting him for speed and average. Hopefully he's a good defender. Real life value might be fine, but that power we saw in 2019 with the super happy fun ball, the 17 homers, probably will never happen again. So just temper the enthusiasm I finally have after years and years of getting it wrong with Victor Robles. 86.4 is the win total from PECTOA for these Mariners. Too hot, too cold, or just right?
Too hot? Don't hate me, Seattle. Sorry.
I landed this is another just right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the lineup's not as bad as people make it out to be, including me. I've come to a normal place with it. Had
like impact offensive prospect that like you could be like, oh, this guy's going to come up and be great. Like you can do that a little bit more with the Rangers, right? When you're talking about like Langford and Carter and.
Yeah, well, that's one of those areas too where if Colt Emerson were ready right now, it'd be like, oh, yeah, okay, there's the guy. He's a little further away than Cole Young though, so then you have that. It's probably maybe August, but you wouldn't see him before then. That'd be a pretty aggressive ascent through the remaining levels of the minors if it plays out. But I think it's just right. I think the top 3 in this division are absolutely as close as PECTOA has laid them out up to this point. Let's get to the A's, where we get a ton of questions in our Discord about the move out of the Coliseum into the ballpark in Sacramento. I know you talked about that with Jason Collette and Justin Mason on the Friday show. It's neutral for the PCL, just to give everybody a refresher, which probably means it's much more hitter-friendly than the Oakland Coliseum. And just how much more hitter-friendly, that's still a little bit up in the air. We did get a follow-up question as to whether or not that would be factored into any projection sets already, and my lean is probably not, because it's it's a pretty significant manual adjustment. I know that the Bat X does a lot with park factors because Derek Hardy models that stuff really, really well. But that's an area where I do think what you see on the screen may not always be as accurate as you'd like it to be, given some of the uncertainty.
I would venture a guess, and I should know this, but I would venture a guess that Derek Hardy has modeled this, and because we do have minor league park factors. And if you look at their starting pitchers, the Bat X has everybody over 4.5 ERA. And I mean everybody, and including people that I like. They just happen to have a 4.5. So I kind of think this is modeling towards, an offensive, because, they have Jeffrey Springs. The Bat has Jeffrey Springs with a 4.5 ERA, but still a 1.6 WAR, right? So they're not saying that they're terrible. So I'm reading between the lines and saying that this is a park factor situation. There is some guessing, and you may notice that the Bat in general seems to have a slightly higher offensive environment across the board. And there is some guessing on how the ball will play season to season.
Oh, we're back on that again. Yeah, you're right.
I don't really want to talk about that. It's true. But I just want to say that the Bat has, I think from what I've talked to about Derek Hardy about this, he kind of regresses offensive environments itself. Like he projects the offensive environment, which is a smart way to do it, of course, because we don't know exactly. We know that there's been these swings in the offensive environment. So, but there is a certain amount of guesswork when it comes to even the park factors, because the park factors are also minor league players playing in a minor league park. What happens if everybody hits the ball 2 miles an hour harder on average?
Yeah.
How does that park play?
Right. That also is a moving target. Yes.
Yeah. So I think this will be a boon for the offensive guys. What I have found with the pitching guys, and we can talk about them more specifically in a second, but just what I found with the pitching guys is they are good sleepers in super deep leagues. I don't like, if you're in a 10-team league, I don't think you want a single athletic starter, and E12 gets really tight. But I start to really like them in drafting holes and 15-team bench and stuff like that.
AL only, yeah. There's definitely some spots where they make a lot more sense. Maybe some overcorrection happening in the deeper leagues, trying to account for how Sacramento's ballpark is going to play with big league players in it. The hitter snapshot, though, I think there's more help coming. We saw Lawrence Butler break out a year ago. We saw JJ Bleday take a step forward. Brent Rooker had a career year. Tyler Soderstrom was interesting in the second half. Shea Langoliers got better. Like a lot of the hitters
together
got
a lineup.
better.
Yeah.
Zach Geloff was sort of the exception, the guy that looked so good in the second half of 2023. And I think he was going through some swing adjustments and had an injury. So a tough season all around for Geloff. And there might be some questions just related to like, what do you think he's going to be long-term anyway? And trying to factor that in is pretty tough. But they may have a full season of Jacob Wilson at shortstop. Nick Kurtz, their first rounder last year, could be on the big league roster for a significant portion of this year. And Colby Thomas could enter the corner outfield mix for them too. So there could be a little more depth than what you see when you look at the projections as they stand right now. The free agent moves, Gio Urshela was basically it. They lost Abraham Toro. So Urshela's a nice infield glove, but not necessarily a guy that you're going to play every single day. I think he's a little more of a super sub as this roster keeps getting better. They made the move to get Jeffrey Springs via trade that you alluded to before, and then signed Luis Severino in free agency. Sean Newcomb, Austin Adams are out, and they added Jose Leclerc to the bullpen in free agency as well. So more additions on the pitching side, with the assumption that the position player prospects that are knocking on the door are going to have prominent roles probably by the end of the year. I wanted to ask you about Lawrence Butler specifically, right? Third highest playing time projection on the screen, 25 homers from the Bat X. 244, 305, 442. Not a great slash line, but still 14% better than league average. And you've talked about Butler having to tweak his approach because he was being pitched differently during that breakout last year. And if you take a look at what his O-swing percentage has done, the amount he has chased during his time in the big leagues, it has been a little bit of a wild ride. It's been a constant moving target. The K rates have been up and down to pretty extreme degrees. Where's the baseline for Lawrence Butler when the dust settles, as the adjustment phase continues to play out? Are you see someone that you're actually trusting to continue building on the breakout, or do you think we're going to get a little bit of pullback compared to what he was doing in the second half when he was basically a top 10 player?
Yeah, it's wild. His O swing, it's like, there are times when he has the rolling O swing down to 25%. And then there's these 3 peaks in his career, which has been pretty short so far, where he's rolling at 40%. And so what I see here is someone that can be pitched to and that pitchers figure out at regular intervals, and then he makes an adjustment. And I see 3 separate adjustments that's led to 3 separate hot streaks for him. So maybe there's a little streakiness to him, but I do want to point out that I did a piece once about how volatility, and this is a measure of volatility, is the difference between those peaks and valleys in his WOBA, the blue line, if you're looking on YouTube. And Bill Petty did this piece about volatility, and he measured it, and he said that strikeout rate is possibly related to volatility. So guys who strike out a lot will see bigger peaks and valleys. That makes sense. And walk rate is a little bit related to it, because if you have a high walk rate, you can produce on the field even when you're not doing other things. A high walk rate will lead to lower volatility. But the most interesting thing that I found from his research was that if you age volatility, if you look at volatility over time, it just goes down. And part of that is because the peaks aren't there so much. But the other part of that is the valleys aren't there so much. And players figure out, if he's made 3 adjustments and you see those 3 different peaks, and 3 different ways that pitchers were pitching him that were working and then stopped working. If he's made those 3 adjustments, those 3 adjustments are in his bag.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like he can be like, oh, this guy's trying to go high in the zone on me. And that was working for a while, but I got a little flat swing. I can just push this out to right field or whatever. You know what I mean? Or push this out to left field. And so, he has these different tricks in his bag. And what I found was that the hitters over time, as they get older, and this is actually mirrored in psychology research, which is that we get better at being happy over time because we have coping mechanisms. And people make fun of coping mechanisms, but they are absolutely how we get better at being adults. Like we just know, oh, I need to go work out. Like,
oh, I got to get some ice cream.
Whatever it is. And people may make fun of that, but it works. It's a way for us to soothe ourselves. Oh, I just need to sit in front of the TV for an hour and just not think about things. We have these mechanisms that make us feel better, and they do absolutely level our lives out. And in some way, Butler's, up and downs have something to do with that. Now, it could be another down year. Maybe he has a down half, and everyone said, I told you so. But I think even if he has a down half, he's going to have a great second half. Like he's shown 3 different separate adjustments.
Yeah, a lot of ways for him to be valuable. I'd like to see that 25.2% K rate. It's not a bad projection at all in that regard. So that's pretty encouraging for Lawrence Butler.
The ball velos are pretty good. Like, I mean, they're not amazing. He's not going to be like an Alvarez type or something. He's not going to just hit tons and tons of homers. Maybe the 25 homer projection is aggressive depending on how the park plays. But with an 11% barrel rate and like a 112 max EV, he has power.
One thing that I'm looking at with these projections is the BABIPs and the batting averages that are right next to each other. I wonder if they're just low across the board, because even if it's not necessarily a huge power boost, it's just a slight power boost, or a decent but not like overwhelming home run boost. Balls in play, like I just expect balls in play to be different overall for the Oakland hitters, and I think maybe they're under projected by average as a result of BABIP coming out low.
He hits the ball hard, and he's not a 50% fly ball guy, and he's not a 50% pull guy. So if you put those things together, you would expect maybe a BABIP over 300. And there's only Zips has a 303 for him. So I think he'll have better than a 250 average. And as I mentioned, 256 or whatever, like is the kind of the target for 15 teamers to be in the top 3 to 4 spots in the standings, I think, for at least in draft and hold. So I actually think that he will be a net neutral when it comes to batting average.
The pitching, as you mentioned before, has some big questions. I mean, Luis Severino leaving Citi Field for half of his starts, going back into a more hitter-friendly environment. Of course, he did it for the beginning of his career at Yankee Stadium. It's going to make it tough for him to repeat the ratios that he delivered a year ago. But he's important as far as eating up innings for this group. Springs, we talked about him on our pitching preview. Just the stuff just wasn't back post-injury, so I'd really want to watch him closely in spring training before putting any sort of expectation for him to have a sub-4 ERA again out there. Osvaldo Bido is someone I think you've kind of grown to like over time. It's questionable command, but definitely a deep enough arsenal with good enough stuff where he could still take another step forward and really build upon what he did last year.
Yeah, I mean, the fastball 107 stuff plus, slider 112 stuff plus, cutter 117 stuff plus, sinker 108 stuff plus. Like, he has a wide arsenal. And, you know, in terms of command, it hasn't shown in poor walk rates in the minors. Location Plus did say he was terrible last year, 88. And, you know, maybe that played out in his walk rate a little bit. But I would just assume that he's going to be pretty good. I think all the building blocks are there. You are looking at the oopsie projections when you're looking at these. These are going to be the most positive for pitchers with good stuff. Plus, if you scroll back up again just real quick, that Severino projection for a 3.99 ERA is the only projection for under 4. Mm-hmm. And so even when I was doing my rankings, even though he had that projection, I gave him a little bit of a softer ranking than you might expect given that ERA, just to represent the risk that, you know, he's oscillated some in his career. The strikeout rate wasn't great last year, even though he's better. He has become more of a wide arsenal guy thanks to the Mets, and maybe that'll stick. But you know, I think that's a soft 3.99. I don't really believe in that. Jeffrey Springs' velo and stuff didn't come back, so I don't really believe the 3.97 projection for him either. JP Sears, by the Baseball Prospectus Arsenal metrics, has one of the smallest arsenals in terms of like space it takes up in terms of velocity and shape differentials. And I don't think he's a great one. So for me, it's Spence and Bido, and it's those guys as, you know, you're betting on a wide arsenal with some interesting stuff characteristics, hoping that the park doesn't play as bad, and you're taking them in places where you're not investing a lot. If me liking Bido makes him go up too high, then just let him go. You know what I mean? Like that can happen. People pump up players. I do like Bido and Spence where they are now.
Yeah, good depth guys, I think, for deep leagues as you're building out that rotation. Mason Miller, we talked about on the reliever preview, maybe the best reliever in the game. If you said he's going to be healthy all year, then he'd probably be the first closer off the board. A++ in terms of having a guy that's almost untouchable at the end of a game. Leclerc gives them a little bit more than they've had. Maybe a couple guys like Tyler Ferguson end up stepping up to give them a good A bullpen, or at least a good A bridge to get to Mason Miller. But I could see their A relievers getting really overworked. And then I don't know if they have the depth to backfill effectively. I think that's something where the A's still need to find a little something.
I don't know. You don't love Michel Otañez? Oh, God.
The model loves him, right? The model loves Otañez, doesn't it?
Yeah, but also just like if you love stuff with no idea where it's going, he's your guy. Yeah. So, I mean, and Leclerc used to be that, and he kind of mellowed a little bit over time. But there is certainly stuff in this bullpen finally, and you know, I think Otañez is the dark horse. Leclerc is probably the first man up if Miller goes down.
70.7 is the win total projection from PECTOA.
Too cold, dude.
I was too cold on this one too, man. I think it comes from the core bats just being a little better, and that young secondary supporting group coming up to. They're going to score runs. I don't know if they're going to be good at preventing them, but generally, I think they're going to be good enough to exceed expectations. Maybe get to that 76, 77 win range.
These are credible starting relievers. If you're giving me a 70 win projection, you're saying, you know, you don't have, like, you're missing really big portions. And if you look at each of their portion of their team, they're like, these are credible starting pitchers. This might be the worst aspect of their team, but they're credible. You know, this is way better than some of the rotations they've been throwing out there the last couple of years. Like they're finally some pitchers I like. You know what I mean? They've been throwing some rotations out there where you're just searching for a guy to circle.
Yeah, that's true. Even if you're worried about Severino and Springs, that's a better 1-2 than what they've been trotting out as part of this kind of extended rebuilding
They may
effort.
still end up with Jordan Montgomery.
Yeah, that could. Let's close it out with the Angels. Some changes here. They were active to start the offseason. They got on the board again this week with the addition of Kenley Jansen. But the Bats' new faces include Jorge Soler, Yohan Moncada, Travis d'Arnaud, Kevin Newman, Tim Anderson, all kind of vying for jobs there. I mean, d'Arnaud is a clear backup catcher, but Newman versus Anderson, one of those guys could be the opening day shortstop. Out are Brandon Drury, Kevin Pillar, and Miguel Sano. Probably not going to miss anyone from that trio all that much. And on the pitching side, Yusei Kikuchi plus Kenley Jansen, Kyle Hendricks for some innings, out Patrick Sandoval and Griffin Canning. So they're making a lot of moves, and we know they like to move prospects fast. So you could probably say Christian Moore is going to be an addition to this lineup at some point before the end of the season. It's just a question of how quickly they're going to move him up.
There are underrated players on this squad. If you scroll up a little bit, you might be able to see Mike Trout. You've heard of him probably.
Yeah, there he is, below the fold. Because of playing time.
I just traded for Joe Adell last night. And it was actually kind of funny. I traded Kenley Jansen in a 20-team that we're in together now, Devil's Rejects. I traded Kenley Jansen for Joe Adell late last night. It is an OBP league, so it's a possible that Adell becomes part of a punt OBP effort on our side, or he's just a bench guy. But we had Ryan Presley and Felix Bautista, and we thought Joe Adell would be a better addition to our team. Also, I just want to point out that there's like a 5% chance that a 25-year-old Joe Adell scares pitchers into walking him. This is an actual thing that happens. You can hit the ball so hard that pitchers will walk you because they're scared of you. This is a thing that we've seen in the numbers. If you want a person who describes this in his career, it is Chris Davis with a C. He did not have a great sense of where the zone was. Then he showed everybody that he could hit the crap out of the ball, and they walked him for a while. And as soon as he started to not hit the crap out of the ball, the walk rate disappeared. You can even see it in Albert Pujols' career walk rate. So there's a chance that Joe Adell walks 10% of the time next year just based on the fact that he's hitting 25 to 30 homers. So that was part of the reason that we went and got him. I think in terms of really good hitters that I would like to have on my team as building blocks, it's Logan O'Hoppe and Zach Neto. As veterans, I like Taylor Ward and Mike Trout, obviously. And then Jorge Soler is an underrated hitter. So there are some aspects that I like. I just think that Nolan Shanuel is not a major league first baseman. I think Rengifo is best categorized as a utility guy. Neto with the injury is going to be tough early in the season. And they really need somebody to step forward out of Joe Adell and Mickey Moniak beyond even what they've done for this to be an actual lineup, that people will be afraid of. And they need Mike Trout to be healthy for most of the year. I mean, that's an obvious one. Yeah,
that's sort of the big one, right? It's like you look back at the last 4 seasons, Trout got to 499 plate appearances in 2022, 362 in 2023, but under 150 both in 2021 and in 2024. So the further he moves into his 30s, the more questions you have about his ability to stay on the field. On a per game basis, the skills still look there from a power perspective, and even the speed last year, he showed he still can swipe bases. He was 6 for 7 as a base stealer in 29 games. So there could be a mostly vintage per game season from Trout. It's just do you project him for 125 games and say that's the ceiling? And that's it. I mean, the 111 with 478 plate appearances puts him 7th on the team in usage.
And that could be aggressive. I mean, I don't know. Like you said.
It could be, but
that's a 50-50 proposition.
If he feels good, he's going to be he'll be second on the team probably because of the way that everything else fits together. I do think that Neto shoulder injury is a bit of a mystery as far as the severity. That's a big one for them because I think he's a really important player for them both in the present and in the future. Some of the things Adell was doing last year were very interesting. I think he can wrestle away more than 440 plate appearances. If he builds on that, he could end up being 100 plate appearances light in this projection. That wouldn't be all that surprising.
It's another one of those probabilistic things. I don't think there's any way he ends up with 440. It's more like 600 or 300. You know what I mean? He's a right-hander with huge flaws, but huge sort of batted ball power. So it's it's either going to work or it's not. 440 is kind of what do you mean? He's going to be in a big side platoon, but he's right-handed. Like, what do you mean? What does 440 mean? Why are you taking him out of games? Like, what does that mean? I don't know. Is he hurt? I don't know. It does reflect the fact that there's risk that he's just not good.
Yeah, I do like this group of hitters better today than I did a year ago. So I think they're improved, at least on paper. I think they'll be improved by results.
I don't think
they shouldn't lose 100. I think you can look at this team and say, hey, they might not be doing it the way a lot of other people would be doing it if they had the same resources, but give the people in charge credit for at least going out there and trying to get better, because there are plenty of teams that don't do that with the ways they spend. The pitching side of this team might have a little more room for some debate. When you start looking at the Angels, we were kind of bummed, I think, when Kikuchi landed there, but frankly, like, he gives them a kind of a soft ace, we'll call him, like a guy that when he's pitching well has shown that kind of ceiling. They definitely needed somebody like that atop the group. Tyler Anderson's season a year ago was a little underrated. Jose Soriano has had multiple Tommy Johns, but he has electric stuff. So you at least have 3 quality starters up top that could be there.
Doing?
What do you think they're doing?
The YOLO yo-yo.
You think you're going to give them that much credit?
I mean, look, Kikuchi, like, just look at the wars. Kikuchi 3, Anderson 0.8, Soriano 2.1, Hendricks 0.7, Detmers 1.6. And then think about the players. Like, Soriano and Detmers represent upside. And to some extent, Kikuchi changed his arsenal in Houston, right? And if those changes stick, and that was the optimal arsenal, then he could have the best year of his career, which would be better than these projections. It'd be like a 3.5 with 13 wins, a bunch of strikeouts. Like, he'd be like a 4-win player, and they would look so smart for that signing. The downside is the command problems come back. The walk rate goes up. It was just a temporary adjustment that didn't stick. Soriano, 100-mile-an-hour sinker. He sat 99 plus last year with a splitter that looks good by the model and 2 breaking balls. Jose Soriano is one of my favorite sleepers. In fact, I was going to go with Spencer Arguetti, and I'm still haven't decided yet which one I'm going to do for the division. But Soriano, oof. And then Kyle Hendricks is like, I don't. That's one where I'm like, why? Why
you're hoping for a lot of innings, but they were quick to make that move too. And it's like, maybe you would have done better waiting it out. Maybe Martin Perez would have been the better call.
For?
Oh man,
he didn't get the full 15, right? Like,
no. It was, I think it was more like
6 or something,
5 or 6. Yeah, it was not a lot.
Yeah, so I guess they just didn't want to spend in the 15s, and they thought, I don't know. I think I'd rather have Martin Perez.
Yeah, I definitely would. As far as the bullpen goes, the addition of Kenley Jansen probably at least takes a large chunk out of the projected saves you would have given to Ben Joyce, right? Even if Joyce ends up finishing the year with the job, it's hard to imagine that if the Angels have 35 or 40 saves in that bullpen this year, that Jansen doesn't get at least 20 of them.
Oh, yeah. I think this is a classic start with Jansen, end with Joyce situation.
Yeah. Which just flips the ability to really draft Joyce in a lot of mixed leagues. In some deeper formats, you can still try to stash him away and get those saves later. Draft and hold, he's still there, but he's going to fall a lot off of the ADP. Is their bullpen a little better overall by depth than expected? Chase Silseth at least throws really hard and is kind of interesting. They've been piling up pitching prospects. A few of those guys could break through and maybe have greater roles. Robert Stevenson might be healthy in the second half. Free agent signing that didn't get to pitch last year because he was hurt, but maybe there's a little more in this relief core also once we get to the middle point of the season at least.
Yeah, I mean, if Stevenson's pitching with it, they've got, 98 and 100, in setup. Brock Burke is a decent lefty. And then, Kenley Jansen is a credible veteran. So yeah, it's a pretty good, it's getting somewhere. Yeah. And then Caden Dana is an interesting pitching prospect for them in the rotation. That was just amazing last year in the minors. Stuff didn't love his overall arsenal, but it did give him some credit for a good changeup. It's 10 innings, and I know Stuff Plus is supposed to be great in these things. But to go from a 30% strikeout rate, 27% in Double-A to 15% in the majors just suggests to me that there could could be something there. He's not gonna. I'm not gonna circle him as somebody that I need to get or anything, but he does count as part of their backup plan for if Hendricks doesn't work out. Caden Dana's on that list, and Aldegary is on that list, and Hanowitz, who has a super sinker but can't strike anybody out, is on that list. So the depth is getting better, the bullpen's getting better, everything's getting a little bit better over time, but you just wonder, would a different regime have turned this around quicker?
Well, and I always feel like when I'm talking about the Angels, you have to grade the front office on the curve of working for Artie Moreno. The challenges that presents, how Artie wants things done, the areas where he will spend versus the areas he won't. I think that makes it a more difficult job than it actually should be. So that's kind of part of the equation for me too. The not so fun fact about the Angels, only 5 teams have a lower playoff percentage than the Angels do. The Rockies, the White Sox, the Marlins, the Nats, and the A's. So that gives you an idea of how much the projections like this team as it is currently assembled. The win total is 73.4. Nope, 74.7. The Jansen signing's now factored and it's moved up since that happened. Too hot, too cold, or just right for these Angels?
One of the things that projection systems do is they push everybody towards the middle. And so they're usually not that great. That's part of why we thought the Dodgers were too cold last year with their 101 projection. We thought this is a great team. It's gonna push past. It's gonna add the deadline. It's gonna keep getting better. The Angels, I have Fangraphs has them at 76. I see some nation sort of good team aspects to it. I would say if I thought they were going to keep their team together and go for it, then I would say too cold. But the reason I'm going to say too hot is because I think they'll sell at the deadline.
They won't have enough in the tank. They'll sell, and the quality of the replacements won't be there to make them a team that's like kind of plucky with young players, right? Because they've already rushed most of the prospects. They're already there, with the exception really of Christian Moore on the hitting side. So yeah, I'm with you on that overall take.
To hear stuff about should you sell Trout at the deadline, and they'll I bet you even Kikuchi gets floated at the deadline, but then they'll end up just trading Tyler Anderson if anybody wants him, and Kenley Jansen if anybody wants him, and Jorge Soler, and calling it a day. I mean, it's depressing, and I hope I'm wrong, but I think that's been what's happened in Anaheim recently.
A franchise in purgatory until there is an ownership change. I think that's the way to describe the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim. They definitely are in Anaheim. They are not in Los Angeles. I know how maps work.
Not even the Los Angeles Angels to me. They're the Anaheim Angels.
No, you will always be the Anaheim Angels. Yeah. You can call yourself the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, but you are the Anaheim Angels. All right, some fantasy favorites. The fantasy favorites from this division as far as some sleepers. I'll start with a bat. I think Tyler Soderstrom is pretty interesting. His days behind the plate are probably over, but the strikeout rate dropped during his second run in the big leagues last year. Excellent contact quality, hard hit rates close to 50%. The barrel rate's there. He's hitting the ball in the air. I think he's got a chance to stick in the middle third of that improving lineup as well. We talked about the park changes with the move to Sacramento. All signs point to Tyler Soderstrom being one of the more interesting first base options where he goes, kind of in that post pick 250 range overall.
Yeah, I love the batted ball oomph, the barrel rate of 14.6 last year. And, it's weird for me to see this collection of skills produce that bad of a batting average. I think and they're still projecting him for a 220, 230 batting average, but he's not a 30% strikeout rate guy. He's not a 50% fly ball guy. He's not a 50% full pull guy. And yes, he has poor speed, but are the 260 BABIPs he's getting based on that, or minor league BABIPs? I don't see where these are coming from, unless, does he have a really bad pop-up problem? Did I miss that? No, he doesn't even have a bad pop-up problem. I don't get it, dude. I don't get those BABIPs. So, there's 250 with 30 homers is within reach.
Yeah, love it. Love that call. You got a sleeper bat from this division?
Yeah, this comes from the fact that breakouts can come from anywhere. He's 27. He's boring. There's not really a reason to call him a sleeper, except that Jeremy Pena hits homers, steals bases, makes contact, has enough batted ball power, and has an everyday job as a shortstop, and is 27. I mean, these are also reasons that he could break out. And the last reason that is maybe the most important is that if you use Oopsie as a projection, he projects to be every bit as valuable as Matt McClain and CJ Abrams, and he goes 60 to 100 picks later than those two guys.
Good oatmeal, I think, is the way to describe him.
It's really hard sometimes to see that the value of a guy who's like, 260, 18. You're like, what's he do for me? Everything.
A little bit everything, yes. He keeps your team on track to where it needs to go. And
then he's dropping for some reason,
maybe some overall concerns about that Astros lineup just not being as good, and the supporting cast dragging down the runs and RBIs a little bit. Maybe that's baked in.
People think the ceiling isn't there anymore.
That could be true
he's
too.
Played enough where he just hasn't broken out yet. So people are like, well, that's it. This is it.
Yeah, you mentioned Caden Dana in the Angels preview. I actually think he's kind of a good sleeper. Like, they rushed him to the big leagues last year. It's a very low to me call for a guy that was a prospect, like on a lot of lists, and probably still is. He's still eligible, but he was 20 years old at Double-A last year and had a 20% strikeout minus walk percentage. So yeah, I know the model stuff didn't look good when he came up and he got pounded. The home run rate was through the roof in that limited sample, but 146 innings between the two levels last year. Given the way that rotation is built, I have a hard time believing that Caden Dana doesn't spend most of the year as a starter for the Angels. I think he's an important part of what they're trying to accomplish there. So more for deeper leagues. I don't know if we're drafting Caden Dana in a 12-team mixed league, but I do think there's still a lot to like there despite the bumpy debut.
Yeah, I'm going to continue to give you guys shallower sleepers, I guess, than DVR on this episode. I'm going to give you Spencer Arrighetti, who was is he in my top 50? Where is he in my rankings? He's definitely draftable, I think, in all leagues. I got him 61 in my ranks today. Part of the reasoning is the model refresh really liked him and fit better with his results on the field, with an above average fastball, an elite curveball, an averages cutter, and a good slider. He has all that he needs for lefties and righties. A 27% strikeout rate last year for Spencer Arrighetti. That's a 17% K minus BB. And the big flaws were walk rate and home run rate. When the new model spits out like a home run percentile, like how likely the shapes of your pitches are to give up home runs. And he is actually below he has better than average home run suppression. Last year, the average home runs per nine for a starting pitcher was 1.22. And the only projection system that says that Arrighetti can do anything like that with his home run rate is Oopsie, and it gives him a 3.94 ERA with a 25% strikeout rate. So that is absolutely Sleeperville in most leagues, and I like him. Circle him up.
All right, I'm going to put John Gray's name back out there as my sleeper reliever. He has to become a reliever for this to even come true, but I think the fact that he is on board with it, and then seeing guys like Bradford and Dunning that they've leaned on for bulk in the past, thinking about Rocker and Leiter, the health of DeGrom, Malley being further removed from Tommy John surgery, and Eovaldi being back, I think they have enough starting pitching depth if they can make it through spring without some surprising injuries piling up to make that move, and they can bump all those other new relievers down a chair, and this could be that second act for John Gray where, again, he sort of takes off. I think he could be a top 15, top 20 closer pretty easily if we knew he had the job. So I'm going to put him into that sleeper relief pitcher category.
This is the division of the setup man for me, and I'm going to waffle and give you 5 names. But the reason I think this is still valuable to people, even though we set up this whole thing just to make me make decisions, so that I would actually give you one name.
This was your idea.
But the problem is, I don't know that, I can't tell you which of these guys are going to get hurt or lose their jobs. Probably Kenley Jansen. And so therefore, if I was pushed to give you one name, it's Ben Joyce. But I do think that this division has very clear second guys. And the second guys are Robert Garcia, Gregory Santos, Ben Joyce, Brian Abreu, and Jose Leclerc. I think it's very clear that those are the second guys. So if you want to take a second guy in saves and holes, or a guy that might take the job if someone's hurt, it's very clear. If I had to pick one, it's Ben Joyce. He's fire. Kenley Jansen's old. Ben Joyce is still worth picking in most leagues.
All right, I'll allow it because it made sense. It was very concise, and there's a lot of injury risk within that group. That's the downside of Mason Miller, like we talked about earlier. As I said up top, you can join the Discord with the link in the show description. We got some Hive Mind rankings coming back out in about a week or so. We'll compile those, so get your rankings in using the Hive Mind rankings channel. You can find the link to all the forums for all the positions from the position previews. You can find Eno on Bluesky, enosaris.bsky.social. You can find me, dvr.bsky.social. Thanks to Brian Smith for putting this episode together. That is going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Thursday.
Thanks for listening.